chapter is about how different cells of the body are involved in the normal as well as in the disease conditions, right? So it's
Yeah.
basically, we have read about the normal functioning, we have read about the normal structure, but when it comes to disease, the morphology and the functioning of the cells, it usually changes. Fine.
Fine.
uh, so the term is communicable diseases, which refers to any disease that can be transmitted to another person through some through some sources, like through some transfer mechanisms. So these diseases can be transferred to other organisms as well. Fine. So
Fine.
on the contrary, there are non-communicable diseases. Fine. So the non-communicable diseases are those diseases which stay inside your body. You cannot transmit them to others. Okay. So in simple
Yeah.
words, communicable diseases are actually infectious diseases. Fine. And
Fine.
non-communicable are non-infectious diseases. Fine. So these communicable
Fine.
diseases, they spread from one to another via various means and methods, which are usually the bacteria, the viruses, and the fungi, etc. You see here, the communicable diseases, they are transmitted by certain organisms which act as, we call them vectors of the disease, which or vehicles of the disease. So that they are used to transport the disease from one to another person, right? Or maybe from
Right.
one organism to another, maybe from animals to humans, humans to animals, plants to humans, whatever it is, right?
Mhm.
While the
Right.
non-communicable disease, on the other hand, is some alteration in your body, is some faulty mechanisms in your body that are gradually developing. For example, your heart disease. It does not come from any virus or bacteria, right? The heart attack, the diabetes,
Mhm.
right? It does not come
Right.
from any virus, but it comes from maybe your lifestyle, from maybe any other medicine, or maybe just some genetic factors. So this cannot be
Mhm.
transmitted to a person having heart attack, cannot transfer its heart attack to another person, right? But a person having
Fine.
COVID or influenza or any other infectious disease can actually transmit it to someone else. So these are the two major differences of communicable and non-communicable disease. So the most, our target will be on communicable disease here only. So the most important thing that is involved in the communicable disease is actually pathogens. Or pathogen is anything, any foreign body which is actually causing the disease. Okay, which is
Right.
actually going inside the organism, which is like not part of that body, but it is going inside that body, and it is causing some changes in the structure and function of all the cells, right?
Right.
So it is basically a living organisms generally. So communicable diseases are caused by living organisms only, and these are some of the categories of living pathogens that are involved in creating different kinds of communicable, or you can say infectious diseases. So the first ones here are viruses. So we don't actually call them living. They are like subcellular structures. They are not completely living organisms because they can only reproduce when they are inside a living body. Outside a living body, they exist in the form of crystalline structures. These are
Mhm.
multicell viruses that can reproduce, or that can be alive in the human body or in any other organism, in any other living body. So they act as a pathogen of certain diseases, and this is the list of the diseases that is caused by viruses discovered up till now, right? So there is SARS, there's HIV, hepatitis, influenza, and SARS, and a lot more, right? So these are caused by viruses. Fine. Now, then there are another group of pathogens which are called bacteria. These are also single-celled creatures. They are actually living organisms because a bacteria can also live inside the body and outside it. It can easily survive. But why does it has to go to the a host or another organism to get its food, to reproduce maybe, or maybe to have to survive, to thrive? So in order to take food, in order to take shelter, these bacteria go into another organisms. Although they can also exist independently outside the body, but they need a host for efficient energy production and efficient reproduction, right? So these are
Right.
the list of diseases that are caused by bacteria. Okay.
Bacteria. Okay. Yeah.
It's usually pneumonia, UTIs, strep throat, stomach ulcers, which you transmit from foods or maybe waters or maybe your environment, right? Now, fungi is another group of living organisms that are capable of living independently without a host. But again, they need food and shelter from some other organism. So they go inside and like they take the food and shelter from that host. So these are multi-celled but plant-like, similar to tree fungus, right? So they spread like roots of a tree. Fine. So when they are inside in a body or in a host, they spread very fast. That's why fungal infections are very serious actually. For
Mm-hmm.
example, if a diabetic patient gets a fungal infection in foot, it can
Yeah.
actually lead to amputation of that limb, right? Amputation of the foot as well, the surgery of the foot. They have to completely cut the foot in order to stop the fungus from spreading, right?
Oh, yeah.
This is this much dangerous. If you get a fungal infection, it is very difficult to get rid of that. Although you can get rid of fungal infections, but it takes like a lot of time to get rid of fungal infections, and they are actually everywhere around us. They spread like little spores of themselves which attach to our clothes, our accessories, and then those fungal infections can just grow in humid environment. If there's like extra humidity, if the temperature is high or maybe the body is in humid conditions, the fungi will grow and it will lead to infections there. Fine.
Fine.
So these are some of the infections which are caused by fungi in any living organism, mostly in humans actually. We are talking about humans here, so it's about humans actually. Fine. Now then, there are some other organisms that are involved in transmission of diseases or infection diseases from one to another. These are called protozoa. The most common that we see is this malaria. So this malaria is actually a protozoan pathogen which is transmitted by mosquito from one to another organism. So what happens here is that the mosquito, it sucks all the malaria from one patient and then it transmits it to the another patient, right?
Yeah.
Or maybe it can transmit through water as well. Fine. So if you have some damp water, usually this is actually these days in Pakistan, the dengue and the malaria, they are widely spreading just because maybe the strain is getting stronger and maybe people are not taking care much. So that's why this is spreading through water actually these days. Fine.
Mm-hmm.
Then
Yeah.
there are other pathogens. These are actually parasites that actually start living inside the host. These four categories of the pathogens, the virus, the bacteria, the fungi, and the protozoa, they are actually inside the host just to actually reproduce and then they go away. Or they may complete their life cycle and they may die. But these parasites, they are like bigger organisms, bigger pathogens that can actually create their living spaces inside the body. They are like worms, like so they start living
Right.
inside that host. Fine. So there are
Right.
roundworms. Usually there are worms in your intestines and stomachs. In usually children, like in younger age, these parasites are easy to infect the body, and then they start living inside the body until or unless you get them a serious medication to remove them. Fine.
Fine.
So these are single cell categories and these are complex multicellular pathogens. Fine. Then a new
Fine.
category of pathogens is actually external proteins which actually act as like via disease transmitting vectors. Fine. So these proteins, they just multiply. They are usually types of these viral proteins. Fine. So they are going to multiply inside the host and they're going to cause some diseases. So this is actually happening in some cases of some animals. Fine.
Mhm.
So this list is actually not complete. This is some of the categories of diseases caused by certain pathogens. So just to classify how many kinds of pathogens are there infecting the body and causing the non-communicable diseases. Okay.
Right.
Any questions from here?
No, no questions so far.
Okay. So this is the modes of transmission of infectious diseases or communicable disease. First is just general transmission. It can transmit from animals to humans, from the environment, from the animals, from other organisms, right? So abiotic environment factor means non-living environmental factors. So they are usually wind and water. So pathogens can be transmitted from water, as I said about malaria, right? As I said about maybe like the COVID, it is spreading in the air, fine. So it can spread
Mhm.
from the air as well. So you can inhale the spores, you can directly contact with the virus through wind or water. So this is the non-living factors, non-living mode of transmission. You just go out, you just touch the water, you just are exposed to the infected air and you get infected with the pathogen, right?
Right.
This is first mode of transmission. The second mode of transmission is animal vectors. For example, there is bird flu in chickens, maybe, or then there's like mosquitoes that are transmitting diseases. Then there are some flies, there are some fleas, the animal fleas, the pet fleas. They are actually causing some diseases and they are acting as vectors of the disease. Vectors means they carry the pathogen from one to another organism. Okay.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
these are the general transmission modes and specific transmission modes, which means that those modes where human to human contact is involved. So these are some of the modes of human to human transmission for different pathogens. So it can be direct contact with the infected individual, as in case of COVID recently. The pathogen survives best inside the body. So when they are directly contact each other, for example, they exchange any kinds of fluids. Maybe they drink their uh, fluids from the same cup, same glass. Maybe they are exchanging the blood with each other. Fine. So if there is any
Mhm.
direct contact between two humans, it is going to transmit pathogens, and these are some of the examples. Maybe HIV, herpes virus, Ebola, and now you can add COVID here as well. Fine. Now, then there
Mhm.
is indirect contact of the pathogen. For example, this infected individual, it is he or she is touching this objects around, fine. And if the other normal person comes and touches the same objects, it is going to cause the disease, fine. Because the pathogen, it
Mhm.
is going to live on these objects now, the door locks, the lift buttons, etc. Fine. So
Fine.
other humans are going to pick up the pathogen from the surface of the objects which the infected individual has actually touched. Fine. For example, this
Fine.
influenza and there's some another norovirus. So COVID actually comes in both categories, direct as well as indirect, right? Now, then
Right.
it can be transmission from droplets, and this is the most specific mode of transmission of COVID actually. So, when you talk, when you breathe, you are actually releasing the droplets into the air, right? Or when you sneeze, when you cough, you are releasing droplets into the air. So, if this is the mode of transmission of pathogen, it actually will cause infection in the other person which is in the nearest vicinity, right?
Right.
These kinds of pathogens, they do not live longer. So only when if you are talking and the person is in front of you, he or she can get infected. Otherwise, if you talk and the pathogen, it goes to the air, they will die in a few minutes, right? Fine.
Right.
These are some other examples of the droplets mode of transmission. Then there is airborne mode of transmission. So again, when you talk, when you sneeze, when you cough, pathogens, they are going to be in the air, right? So
Right.
these kinds of pathogens can survive in the air. So pathogens aerosolized and stay infective. So they are going to stay alive in the air, and then from that air, they are going to infect other individuals, right? So in indirect
Mhm.
contact, the pathogens can stay alive on non-living objects. Fine, but in airborne cases, the pathogens can also survive on the in the air. Fine. Now,
Fine. Yeah.
and the last category is fecal or oral. Maybe if you get contaminated with the fecus or the oral cavity or the like anything that is touching the oral cavity, you can get infected. For example, you eat the food of the infected individual, or you drink water in the same glass from the infected individual, you can get the infection, right? Fine.
Yeah.
touching the oral
Mhm.
cavity or feces, it can result in the infection. So these are some of the modes of transmission from human to human, right? Now,
Right, right.
these interaction of pathogens with host can cause damage to the host in two different ways. Fine. So whatever the host is, whether it is plant, whether it is animal, it'll be having some cells in the body, right? Some cells,
Mhm.
it will be made of some cells. So it can actually cause damage to those cells in two different ways. First is direct damage to the cell, right? So what is happening in this case, don't get confused with this specific example. It is just to show you that, for example, there's a virus and it goes inside the plant or in the animal cell. What it is going to do there is that it is going to multiply in a huge number inside this cell. Fine, whether it's a plant or an animal cell. And now the number increases to such an extent that the cell is going to burst and new viruses are going to be released outside this cell, and they are going to infect more cells of the body. And then this number continues, and then you get the whole disease because of infection of this, because of damaging of this cell by a single virus. So this is called direct damage to the host tissue or the host cell. So this is one mode of infecting the individual, right?
Yeah.
The virus is itself going into the cell, and then it is creating more copies and bursting the cell. The other thing can be the virus or the bacteria, whatever the pathogen is, it can release certain chemicals that can actually damage the host tissue. So in this case, let's say there's bacteria, the pathogen is bacteria here. So this bacteria is going to release some chemicals in this space which are going to attract the immune cells of the body. Fine, or which
Mhm.
are going to
Yeah.
activate the body, whether it's plants immune response or animals immune response. They are going to activate the immune response of the body, and that immune response is going to cause some damages here. Fine. So this is
Mhm.
another way of releasing chemicals or toxins to damage the host tissue. So these are the two ways through which the pathogens are going to affect the infected individual, right?
Right.
Is there any question up till now?
No.
Okay. So basically, if we talk about plants, how plants get in those infections, how plants can get infections inside them. Okay. So there are basically two modes. One is through soil contamination. The soil may be contaminated with the bacteria or the virus or the fungi, any kind of pathogen. If the soil can be contaminated, and that contaminated soil can infect the roots of the plants. Now, through these roots, the infection is spread to the whole plant till leaves, right?
Fine. Yeah.
This is one mode of transmission of, let's say, pathogen into the body of plant. Okay. So the other mode is
Mhm.
that the pathogen, it comes from the air and it attaches to the leaf, maybe. Fine. And then it starts spreading till the roots. Fine. So
Fine.
it can be both ways. It can be from direct soil contact. Maybe the plant is grown in a contaminated soil, or maybe there is an attack of bacteria on the soil, not on the plants, and then the plant get infected. Or maybe the pathogen directly infects the plants, and then the soil is infected. So in both cases, both the plant and the soils are getting infected, right?
Right.
So how do plants respond to this infection here? So whenever any kind of pathogen it comes near the plant, the cells of the plant, I told you that there are cells both in animals and plants. So specifically the cells of the plants, they have certain receptors. We talked about proteins on the plasma membrane that act as receptors. Okay.
Mhm.
I told you the receptors, they are going to bind to chemicals from outside and then start responding to those chemicals. So actually what is happening here, when the plant is infected, these bacteria or these pathogens are going to release some chemicals. Those chemicals are going to bind to these receptors on plant cells, right? These are called MAMs or DAMs. MAMs, you can just memorize them as damage associated proteins. Okay, some damaging molecules. Okay, So these damaging molecules are actually toxins released from the pathogen. So they are going to come, they are going to bind here, and they are going to trigger the cell surface immunity in plant cell. Fine. First of all, the
Right.
cell surface immunity will be triggered, and then they are going to trigger the intracellular immunity. Inside the cell, there are going to be certain chemicals released by the plants to kill these either pathogens or to get protected from these pathogens. So this is going to trigger a whole mechanism inside the plant cell to get rid of these pathogens. Fine.
Mm-hmm.
This is how a plant will respond to the infections, or plant will respond to pathogens. And these are different types of plant defense mechanism you see here. The plant defenses can be physical defenses, it can be chemical barriers. So how physical defenses? The plant actually forms a thick wax or a cuticle around its cells to avoid entry of pathogens or pathogen related molecules, right? So you see, leaves of the plants, they are actually covered with cuticles or waxes or thick secretions to avoid entry of pathogens. Then the plant has a strongest barrier of the cell wall. Fine. And then it has stomata, and then it has callus deposition. So it has certain secretions out on the surface of the plant cell so as to avoid easy entry of the pathogen inside the cell. Okay. This
Yeah.
is physical barrier for plant. Now, what can be the chemical barriers? How can plant protect itself from pathogens? It is actually involved in protecting itself by reducing the nutrient that the pathogen needs. For example, the pathogen is coming from maybe nitrogen. It is going to reduce the nitrogen content in plant so that the bacteria dies instantly. Okay. Or
Mm-hmm.
maybe it can change the pH of its environment, of its body or of the soil, so that the change in pH will ultimately kill the pathogen. Fine. Then there are some phyto means plant related. Okay. Phyto anticipants and plant defenses, these are specific chemicals released by the plant cell to protect itself from invading pathogens. Okay.
Yes. Okay.
These pathogens can be of any category in plants: bacteria, fungi, aphids, nematodes, and viruses. Aphids are most common pathogens or vectors of the plant infections, right? So, this is how a plant responds to all the pathogens in the environment, all the bacteria or viruses or fungi in the environment, right?
Yes.
Now, moving towards animals or humans, okay? So, for animals or humans, there are two different types of defense mechanisms. I hope you can see it
Mm-hmm.
clearly. I
Yes.
okay. So one is called the non-specific defense mechanism, and the other is called the specific defense mechanism, right? What is the non-specific defense mechanism? Just like plants, animals also have three different kinds of defense barriers: first line of defense, second line, and third line. So the first line is actually the physical barriers. Okay, so just like plants, animals have the skin, they have the mucous membranes, they have certain secretions to keep the pathogens outside. Fine. For example, sweat. Uh, even your sweat is involved in keeping your body get rid of the pathogens. Okay, fine.
Yeah.
So these are the physical barriers that keep infections outside, that help in keeping the pathogens outside. So if somehow the bacteria, there are thousands of bacteria in the environment that we are regularly exposed to, but the skin and the membranes under the skin, they do not let those pathogens go inside very frequently. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But somehow, if the pathogen, it crosses this line of defense, fine, and it enters into the body, fine. It's maybe somehow it enters into the body. Then there is second line of defense to protect us from those pathogens, and those are the phagocytic white blood cells. I'll tell you what is phagocytosis. So those are specific cells of the immune system, some antimicrobial proteins that actually directly kill the pathogens, and the inflammatory response of the body. So the body is going to instantly respond to those pathogens to avoid further infection. Okay.
Okay.
And again, if the pathogen crosses this line of defense as well. For example, it escapes this phagocytic killing by the white blood cells or by the antimicrobial proteins. Then there is a third line of defense, which is called the specific defense of the defense mechanism, or our immunity, basically. This is called our immunity. So if again the pathogen is strong enough to evade these two mechanisms, it is going to be killed by the third line of defense, which actually involves specialized cells for infections called lymphocytes and antibodies. These two things are actually actively involved in protecting our body against infections. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So this specific response, it actually generates efficient and selective response against pathogens. For example, you have your immune system active for the flu virus, you have your immune system active for the COVID virus, you have your immune system active for a lot more other diseases to fight with them. So these pathogens actually don't kill you. Fine. If your immune
Mm-hmm.
system is strong enough to kill these, for this means that if these two antibodies are strong enough to kill these, you are going to survive even after the infection. But let's say if any case these two cells are not strong enough to fight that pathogen, you might die of the infection. Fine. So, the recent deaths due to COVID because of not having vaccinations was because of the reason that our body cells, lymphocytes, and antibodies, they did not recognize the pathogen COVID, the coronavirus.
Mm-hmm.
They did not recognize the coronavirus, so they did not had a strategy to fight with them, right? If they
Yeah.
don't have the strategy to fight with them, or if these cells are not strong enough to fight with them, the person would have died. But there were people who survived even the coronavirus. Why? Because these two cells of those patients or those persons were very strong enough to fight with the coronavirus as well. Okay. It all
Yeah.
depends on strength of this part of the immune system, and so that if whether you can survive serious infections or not. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
There
Okay.
are people in the world, and there were people in like history who died of the flu virus as well, influenza virus, because their bodies were not strong enough to fight even the flu virus. But now the flu is so common that we regularly get this flu once or twice a year. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And we are not like seriously ill. Fine. So these are three different stages of fighting the pathogens in animals or the human body. Okay.
Okay.
Any questions up till now?
No, no questions so far.
Are we clear?
Yes.
Okay. The first thing is the first thing that the skin does is that when there comes an infection, it actually tries to, for example, how can the infection come? If you are like hit by some object, by some sharp object, and you get a cut, the bacteria in the air might get exposed to your body, right? So how the skin is going to respond? It will actually try to like clot, or it will actually try to repair that injury happened on the skin cells, right? It will actually try
Right.
to seal that hole that has happened because of that sharp object. So that is called the blood clotting and wound repair process, and this is how it happens. Any injury on the skin, it is going to damage the tissue here. Fine, or it is going to damage the blood vessel as well. That is why there is bleeding after you are cut by a sharp object. Okay. So
Okay. Yeah.
vessel is damaged actually. So now after getting damaged, this vessel is going to contract, fine, and is going to reduce the blood flow here, so as to avoid avoid loss of most of the blood. Okay. So when the blood flow here is reduced, now there are specialized cells in the body. We talked about them. Those are called platelets. Okay. And we
Mhm.
have red blood cells, we have white blood cells, and then we have these platelets. These are not actually cells, these are fragments of some bigger cells, but they are very active in this blood clotting process. Now what will happen there, these platelets will get activated and they'll instantly reach to the site of injury. So when they reach the site of injury, they are going to form a plug here or a clot here. A lot of platelets are going to get trapped here. Okay.
Okay.
How do they get trapped here? They have shown you a flow diagram in your book which shows that fibrinogen is converted to fibrin. So those are specific proteins that are involved in creating a mesh here, a network here, so that these platelets get trapped here. Fine. Those proteins are going to trap all these platelets here and they form this platelet plug. Fine. This is a fibrin clot. So you see here, once all the platelets reach here, the fibrin clot is going to trap them all, and that's why you see a red clot on your site of injury. That red clot actually consists of your activated platelets and fibrin. Fine.
Fine.
So that this is how it stops the bleeding and it stops the entry of more pathogens inside the body. Okay.
Okay.
So this is the first response of the body towards the infection or towards the entry of any pathogen in the body. Okay.
Okay.
Now, the second response, if the any somehow the pathogen enters inside the skin, those pathogens that have actually entered the skin, so these cells, the inflammatory cells, are going to get activated and they are going to fight with that pathogen. So what happens here is that the capillary is going to widen, fine, and there will be increased flow. Why increased flow? Because the white blood cells are in the blood. They are going to rush towards the site of injury. Okay. So once they are
Fine.
rushed, they rush towards the site of injury. The permeability of this capillary wall will increase, which means that it allows the white blood cells to escape and reach the site of injury. Fine. So now
Yes.
this fluid is released into the skin tissue where the damage has happened. Okay. After these
Mm.
white blood cells go there, they are going to attract more white blood cells. Okay. So extravasation of leukocytes to the site of injury, this means that these white blood cells are going to enter to the site of injury. Fine. Then there's going to be systemic response, which means that apart from this movement of leukocytes to the site of injury, the body is going to respond in other ways. Maybe it is going to increase the temperature or call more white blood cells to the site of injury. So in this way, these neutrophils are going to actually fight with the pathogen at the site of injury. So this is how you see this response when you are hit by a sharp object, or when you have something as an infection in your body, right? So it is going
Mm.
to generate heat because of increased blood flow and also the redness because of it. Then the release of this fluid into the tissue is actually causing the swelling at the site. Fine. You see the swelling.
Fine.
This is because of release of this fluid. Then
Yes.
it becomes tender because of the release of these neutrophils here. And because of this systemic response, you are going to experience pain here, which means that you cannot touch this place, and it actually is painful to touch that place, and you will let the blood cells do their work there. Fine. Otherwise, you are going to constantly touch that place, and blood cells are never going to work there. Fine. So this is the quick inflammatory response in case the pathogen crosses the physical barrier. Fine.
Yeah.
Any questions till now?
No, no questions so far.
Okay, so once the neutrophils they reach near the pathogen, they are going to actually do this phagocytosis, which is called eating of the cell. We talked about it when we were talking about different mechanisms in the previous chapter. Okay, we were talking about what we were talking about. We talked about phagocytosis in which topic?
It was to do with in meiosis and mitosis. When we were doing it, we were
We
talking
were
about.
talking about in exocytosis and endocytosis. Fine. So it's type of endocytosis. Phagocytosis and pinocytosis, these are types of endocytosis. Fine.
Mhm.
So what will happen there? That white blood cells that are near the pathogen, they are going to actually take in that pathogen inside. So the plasma membrane is going to like curl around this pathogen. Fine. And it is going to form this vacuole or this vesicle around this pathogen. Fine. This is called the phagosome. Fine. Phagocytic vesicle. Now, this phagocytic vesicle is going to fuse with the lysosomes inside the cell. These lysosomes actually have those killing enzymes or killing proteins. So when it fuses with the phagosome, it is actually going to kill in the pathogen. Fine. So
Mm-hmm.
the pathogen will be killed by the strong lysosomal enzymes and hydrogen peroxide in the lysosome. Now, if this is digested actually, so partially digested microbe is here, and its residual body parts, they are also inside the vesicle. They are still inside the vesicle. So these cannot be further digested. Now the neutrophils are going to release these indigestible materials outside the environment. Okay. So this is how the pathogen is actually killed by white blood cells at the site of injury. You can read it from here as well. Chemotaxis and adherence of microbe to the phagocyte. Chemotaxis means this pathogen is going to release certain chemicals which will be recognized by the white blood cells. Okay. And
Mm-hmm.
then it is going to phagocytose the cell, formation of a phagosome, fusion of the phagosome with lysosome to form a phagolysosome. Fine. Digestion of ingested microbe by enzymes. These enzymes are actually digesting the microbe. Formation of a residual body containing indigestible material, and then discharge of waste material. So this is all. This all is happening at the site of injury. Now, what happens here? So this, I told you that chemotaxis is happening here. Again, this waste material is released. Now, chemotaxis, once the neutrophil release these, fine, these waste materials, where are they going to go?
Um. Uh. Where would they go?
This is a big question. Where would these waste materials go? So actually, they are going to act as cytokines. These are specific. This is a special name for those chemicals released by a phagocyte. Okay. These
Mm.
act as cytokines, which means that they are going to signal other white blood cells to come at the site of injury and engulf these. Okay. So now macrophage is going to come here, lymphocyte is going to come here, other fibroblast, mast cells, granulocyte. So all of these are going to rush to the site of injury to tell, it actually tells them that there is some pathogen or there was some pathogen and something is happening here. Okay. So they have to come here, they have to clear that site from the infections and all these cytokines, right? Okay. So they work
Yeah.
together to clear all the infection from the site of injury. Fine. So
Yeah.
that's why this cytokine is actually a signal to other than leukocytes to remove the pathogen from the body finally. Okay. To remove the remains of the pathogen as well. Okay.
Okay.
Now then there is another term in your book which is called opsins, or opsins are actually, or opsins or opsonization is actually a process where you see this pathogen here. Fine. So how our body is going to detect this pathogen, that we have to phagocytose this. The body actually releases some specialized chemicals, and these chemicals are going to get attached to this pathogen. We call them tags or opsonins. These are going to act as signals for the body to detect them as pathogens. So these opsonins are going to get attached to the surface of pathogen in this way. This is called the opsonization of the pathogen. Okay, the opsins are attached to the pathogen. Fine. Now this opsin, our body probably cannot detect this single pathogen, but it can detect this opsonized pathogen. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
This is also opsonized pathogens. Now, what will happen here is that when the neutrophil or any white blood cell, it detects these opsonins attached to the pathogen, it is going to bind with that. Fine. It is going to bind with that, and it is going to engulf them for phagocytosis. Fine. So this is a difference between opsonin and cytokinin. Cytokinin are actually chemicals that are released to like signal other leukocytes for more better functioning. But opsonins are actually tags for the pathogen, which trigger the phagocytic cell to kill them. Okay. Did you understand this?
Yes.
All clear? The difference between a cytokine and an opsonin?
Yeah.
Okay, fine. So this is a structure and there's a term called antibody. So actually this is the antibody on the surface of the cell which is detecting this opsonin. This opsonin can also be called an antigen, okay, which is going to bind with
Okay.
this place. This is called an antibody. Antibody means it is against this it is going to bind with that and it is going to trigger the immune response. This is the structure of an antibody actually. So
Mhm.
antibody is for every coming pathogen. It is created for every and it is specific. So it has this structure. This is like double layered. There is one chain of maybe amino acids, and then there is another chain of amino acids, and then these two are light chains for the amino acids, right? Fine. And then there are two heavier chains,
Right.
and this section of this chain is always fixed. It remains the same. The amino acids here, they will remain the same. But this blue portion, this is the variable region, which means that it is specific for different opsonins or antigens. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So
Fine.
whenever,
Yeah.
for example, if a bacteria is coming and its specific opsonin is attached to it, this antibody will be specific for that opsonin only, for that bacterial opsonin only. It is not going to bind if there is any other virus, okay, or if there is any
Yeah.
other fungi. So this part is specific for the pathogen, or you can say specific for the antigen. Okay,
Okay.
this
Yeah.
is how it works. You have an antigen that is bound to the pathogen, fine, and you have
Yes.
these antibodies on the cells which are going to kill these bacteria, okay, or kill these pathogens. This antigen is going to bind with these antibodies and form this kind of clusters, okay. Now this cluster will be engulfed by the phagocytic cell, okay.
Mhm. Yeah.
Did you get it?
Yeah.
This is called agglutination. This process is called agglutination. The binding of the antibodies with the antigen and formation of a clump. This is called agglutination. Now, this
Glutination.
does not only happen in case of bacterial antigens and antibodies, but it also happens in case of antigens other than bacterial opsonins. Okay, so maybe
Mm-hmm.
if there are any other foreign particles, antigens are actually any other foreign particles. Fine. If there are any foreign particles and they have certain antibodies in the body or in the cell, these antibodies are always going to bind to those antigens and agglutinate the whole cell. So you see, you might have done this. Maybe you can say blood grouping tests in your lab. I don't know if you have done it or not. What they do is they take a drop of your blood, put it on a slide, and then put a serum on that blood, and you see clumping of the blood cells.
Oh. Okay.
Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so what
Yeah.
happens there is actually your blood has those antigens, the red blood cells has those antigens, specific antigens to identify them as red blood cells. Now they are
Mm-hmm.
adding antibodies from outside, and those antibodies, if they're specific for this antigen, they are going to bind with them and show this clumping. Clumping means, for example, if this antibody is for A blood group, it if you have blood group A, your blood is going to clot. Otherwise, it is not going to clot on the slide. So this was just an example to show to tell you that antigen antibody complex formation is not only in infections but also in other interaction of the cells with antibodies as well. Okay.
Yes.
If you don't have any specific examples in your book, you can just skip that. It was just to let you know how agglutination works. The
Right.
antibodies, they actually bind with the antigen, and this is called agglutination. Okay.
Okay.
Okay, now coming towards the immune system or immune response again. Now, how this agglutination occurs and how this antigen antibody complex works, it works on the basis of this lymphocytes that are actually responding towards different pathogens in the body. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
are we clear up till now?
Yes.
If you have any question, you can ask me.
No. No questions.
Okay, we have, apart from the neutrophils and the other granulocytes, we have these specific lymphocytes that are involved in specific response of the immune system. So the first one is called the B cell, and these are called the T cells. Okay, so we have B lymphocytes and T lymphocytes. The name is totally based on their site of discovery. Okay, B lymphocytes and T lymphocytes. Okay, so how do these B lymphocytes work in the immune response? Fine, they are going to recognize the antigens on pathogen or the soluble antigens. As I talked earlier, that antibody, this B cell is going to actually, it has these antibodies attached to it, and this antibody is going to recognize that antigen on any bacteria or any pathogen, and it is going to bind with that. Okay, and
Yes.
what it does is actually neutralizes those pathogens, or it actually traps those pathogens, and it helps in its phagocytosis and it in the activation of further immune system. Okay, which is called the complement system. Okay, so it is going
Hmm.
to actually neutralize the pathogens by binding with them physically, and then by helping them phagocytose, and then activating the other parts of the immune system. Okay, this is how the B cell works. Okay,
Hmm.
coming towards the T cells, so there are three different types of T cells. These are helper T cells, cytotoxic T cells, and regulatory T cells. So, these T cells are going to bind to the antigens which are presented by another specific category of cells called antigen presenting cells. So, in a body, if the antigen is not bound to pathogen, it might be bound to another cell which is called the antigen presenting cell. You can simply say it actually recognize the antigens on specific cells. Okay,
Okay.
not other than the bacteria. Fine.
Mhm. Yeah.
Now what it does is that it is going to secrete the cytokines to just, as I told you, the cytokines are going to activate other parts of the immune response. Fine, so it activates macrophages, and these macrophages are going to activate other T cells and B cells for inflammation here. Fine, it is going to
Fine.
start a series of activation of immune cells. Okay,
Hmm.
now then what, this is actually activating more immune cells. Now what is happening here, this cytotoxic B cell, it's going to help B cell in killing of the pathogen. It is actually antigen presented by infected or malignant cell. So it is going to detect antigen on the infected cell. For example, the skin cell is infected and the antigen is attached to the skin cell. So this cytotoxic B cell is going to detect that in the antigen present on the skin cell. Okay,
Okay.
now it is going to actually eliminate the whole infected cell. For example, the whole skin cell was infected. It is going to actually remove that cell and replace it with a new cell. Okay? So it is
Okay.
actually going to kill that infected cell. Okay? The whole infected cell, not only the pathogen, but the whole infected cell. So it is, that is why it is called cytotoxic. It is toxic for the cell as well. Okay?
Okay. Yeah.
Fine. It is toxic for the host cell as well, to which the pathogen has attacked. Fine.
Hmm.
Now, then there are regulatory T cells. It does not have any antigen recognition function. It actually helps in regulating and suppressing the immune response. Once antigen has been removed and once the immune system has gotten rid of infection, it is going to help the immune system come back to its normal state. Okay, you don't need to have all the B and T cells active all the time until you don't have any infection. Okay,
Hmm.
so it is going to help in suppressing the response of the immune system. It is actually going to regulate this whole activation of immune response by other helper T cells and B cells. Okay,
Okay.
that's why it's called regulatory T cells. It is actually regulating the immune response. Okay, and
Okay.
again, this natural killer cell, it works like the cytotoxic T cell, and it detects self antigens or foreign antigens on host cells. It is involved in killing of cells, basically killing of infected cells, basically. Fine, so it is also going to function the way this cytotoxic cell is working. Okay, but it
Hmm.
detects antigens on the host cells, not on the pathogen cells. Fine, and it can detect not only the foreign antigens but antigens present inside the body as well. So that is why it is called natural killer cell. It is like a killer present by nature in any every body. Okay, So it can kill
Yeah.
any cell in the body if activated. This is how different lymphocytes are going to show response in the immune system. Can you relate every slide with the other slide? I'm trying to go step by step, okay? That's why I've
Mhm.
not followed the order of your chapters. I just tried to give you a concept that how the immune system starts, how it gets triggered, how different types of cells are going to respond, okay? So do you
Okay.
have
Yeah.
this idea now? First of all,
Yeah.
the pathogens, they'll get opsonized, they'll get those antigens, then they'll get phagocytosis, then they'll
Mhm.
activate rest of the immune system, okay?
Mhm. Yeah.
So these are two different types of responses that are happening in the body. This one is called humoral response and this one is called cellular response. So cellular response, as we saw in this slide, this is a summary of that slide, okay? In
Okay.
cellular response, actually a cell is involved in killing of infected cell. Fine. So you see here,
Mhm.
this T cell is actually it is actually producing a cytotoxic T cell, which is going to bind with the infected cell and kill the whole cell. Okay, kill the whole
Mhm.
infected cell. And again, it's going to do what? Cellular response. It is going to produce another category of T cells, which are called helper T cells. And these helper T cells are going to work with these B cells in producing these antibodies. Fine. Now,
Fine.
these antibodies through these plasma cells. Now, these plasma cells producing these antibodies are going to, number one, bind with the antigen and remove it. Fine.
Fine.
Now, and again, these along with these plasma cells, there are memory B cells which do what? They are going to recognize these specific antibodies against this specific pathogen, and once, if later in life this infection, this virus comes again or this bacteria comes again, these antibodies are going to recognize it instantly and are going to bind with that. Okay,
Mhm.
that is why if you get flu once, you get like immune to that flu virus, fine, and
Fine.
the infection next time is lower as compared to the previous one, fine. And that is
Fine.
why you get specific vaccinations immediately after the birth, fine. So you have a set of vaccinations in within few months after birth, after childbirth. Why? Just to expose the body to specific antibodies so that if later in life those infections occur, they are not seriously fatal. Okay, so they
Okay.
are only mild infections, fine.
Fine.
This is what I talked about. This is called primary and secondary responses. So primary response means simply means the response at first exposure with the pathogen. Okay, whenever the infection occurs first time, B cells are going to get activated. Fine, they are going to produce these plasma cells, and these plasma cells are going to produce the antibodies which are going to bind with the pathogen. Fine, and these are going to live for a longer time in the body. Okay, they are going to, let's say, live forever in your body. Okay, so
Okay.
when the next time infection comes, these plasma cells are going to recognize that infectious pathogen instantly, and they are going to kill them very easily. Okay, so every time after then every repeat infection, these plasma cells will increase in number, and they are going to instantly recognize the pathogen, and then they are going to kill it. Right.
Mhm.
So with every repeated infection, the efficiency of these plasma cells is going to increase. Okay, and they are going to quickly recover you from the infection. Okay, so
Yes.
first time it takes a lot of time to produce plasma cells from B cells, but next time you do not need to produce these plasma cells from B cells. They are already present there in the form of memory B cells, and they are going to convert it into plasma B cells, and they are going to actively participate in killing of the pathogen. Okay,
Yes.
now this is simply the natural immune response of the body towards pathogens. This is called the primary and the secondary response. So we started
Mhm.
from phagocytosis to opsonization of bacteria to activation of T and B lymphocytes, and then to activation of cellular and humoral immune response, which leads to primary and secondary responses. Okay.
Mhm.
Now, apart from this, sometimes due to certain factors, Even if there is no infection in the body, our immune system might get triggered. Fine. So you see,
Mhm.
the T cells, the cytotoxic T cells, and the antibodies produced by the B cells, they start reacting against it, against the antigens in the body, which are not harmful for us, but they start reacting against them and then start killing their own body cells, for example. So
Mhm.
this is called autoimmune disorder or autoimmune. This leads to autoimmune diseases, which means that the body is acting against its own antigens. Autoimmune. Fine. Self
Fine.
antigens. Fine. So this happens in case of rheumatoid arthritis. Maybe you see they have problems in their joints. The body is going to start eating its own joints. Fine. It's going to
Okay.
start eating its own cells, and this
Okay.
usually happens in cartilage cells, in joints, and in bones actually. So
Mhm.
and the body gets false signals that there is these cells are actually infected, and it starts killing those infected cells, those actually so called infected cells, which are not actually infected. So it start eating those cells, and it start then activates a more immune response. As you saw earlier, it is going to continuously activate the immune response, and the whole immune response is going to kill the whole tissue, maybe the whole joint tissue, and then it is going to spread in the body. So this is called autoimmune disorder or autoimmune disease. And there are certain factors for it. It can be possibly caused by your different diet patterns. Fine. Especially the junk food. It can be caused by the genetics. Maybe it is transmitted throughout the family. It can be caused by certain vaccines as well. That might trigger the response of the body to self antigens. It
Mhm.
might be because of certain environmental chemicals, maybe because of some gender issues. It usually happens in females and old
Mhm.
age females after 35, usually 35 years of age. Okay. Or it they call it that it might start between 15 to 44, but it actually starts the ideal age is between 30 and 40. Okay. So
Oh.
these are some of the risk factors for autoimmune disease, and it is actually fatally killing once it starts, and it doesn't gets diagnosed quickly. It spreads very fast in the body, and it can kill the patient.
Mhm.
Okay. So finally, we were now we talked about uh, the natural immunity of the body or natural immune response of the body. Fine. Which is already present in the body. It is also called the innate immune response, which is or the inborn immune response, which is present by birth. Fine. Now then, there is another type of immune response that is actually developed during the lifetime, and that is called the acquired immunity. Okay.
Okay.
So the acquired immunity is of two basic types, the active immunity and the passive immunity. Active immunity simply means that your body is going to recognize the antigen and is going to produce the antibodies for a long term effect. Okay.
Mhm.
And passive immunity simply means that the body instantly gets the antibodies, and it doesn't need to produce those antibodies. And those antibodies are going to simply quickly bind with the antigen and remove them, bind with the pathogen and remove them. So, this is actually quick response in case of emergencies, while this is slower response where the body is exposed to the pathogen first to form the antibodies, and then those antibodies are going to function for the rest of the life. Okay.
Okay.
This active immunity can be of two types. It can be natural active immunity. For example, you are directly exposed to the pathogen, fine, in the environment. Maybe just like we are now naturally exposed to COVID virus. Fine. So
Mhm.
our bodies have started developing the antibodies in response to an infection, right? In response to
Right.
COVID. So those people who got COVID actually got natural active immunity against COVID. Fine.
Natural. Yes.
Natural
Okay.
active immunity against COVID, because the bodies have started developing antibodies against COVID. But there were people who could not get exposed to the COVID, or who didn't want to get exposed to the COVID. Now, what
Mhm.
happened to them? The governments have started injecting antibodies directly to the body. Okay.
Mhm. Yeah.
So now they have injected these antibodies in response to a vaccination. So in the vaccination, they are actually injecting the virus, the weakened
Mhm.
virus, right? that acts as
Right.
antigen to the body, and that results in production of antibodies now. Okay, this
Yeah.
COVID vaccination is actually artificially acquired active immunity. Okay, this is actually
Yes.
artificially acquired active immunity. And
Mm-hmm.
immunity that we developed from natural COVID infections were naturally acquired active immunity. Okay, it developed
Okay.
during our lifetime. It was not already present in the body. Now, what is passive immunity? So, when the babies are born, they are not instantly exposed to any kinds of infection, and they are not even, you can say, active to fight with the infections. So,
Mm-hmm.
when they are breastfeeding, they are actually getting these antibodies, already made antibodies from the mother, so that if they
Mm-hmm.
are exposed to any such infection, the antibodies are ready to quickly respond. They do not waste time in producing these antibodies. Okay, otherwise the
Okay.
baby can die. Fine, if it takes
Fine.
time to produce the antibodies, it can die. So this is called naturally passive immunity. The nature has made this mechanism to provide these antibodies to the baby, which can quickly fight with those all infections. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
this is the only source of natural passive immunity. Fine.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the
Fine.
source of artificial passive immunity, in some cases, you need quick antibodies. Instead of injecting this antigen, you want the antibody to be injected, fine, so that that antibody directly reacts with the antigen and lowers down the infection. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So when we say we are having antibiotics after an infection, we are actually having these antibodies or antitoxins against those pathogens to kill them. Okay. Those are
Okay.
artificially acquired passive immunities. These are quick responding. You get quickly get rid of the infection, but they are not long lasting. Fine.
Mm-hmm.
As soon as antibodies in the body finish, you can again get exposed to the infection, and you'll not be having naturally made antibodies in your body. Okay. But in
Okay.
this case, you are going to slowly develop the antibody, but that antibody is going to maybe remain for the whole life.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So active immunity is slow but long lasting. Passive immunity is quick but short term. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So this is all about immune response, and then there is a concept which is called antibiotic resistance. For example, you get this artificially acquired passive immunity, which means you are getting the antibiotics to fight with the infection. But after some time, that antibodies they do not act, or that antibiotics they do not act on infection, or they do not treat the infection. This is called antibiotic resistance. Fine.
Mm-hmm. Fine.
So what is happening is that they say when first develop, antibiotics can kill the bacteria and cure infections. After first infection, they can simply kill the infection. They can simply kill the bacteria. But after a certain period of time, the bacteria they have actually developed certain ways to get protect themselves from these antibiotics or antibodies. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So even if you are getting those antibiotics, infection doesn't go away. So this is called antibiotic resistance. The bacteria has become resistant to the given antibiotics. Fine.
Fine.
So you have to change this medicine according to this bacteria. Then how does it happen? This is a mechanism of resistance. How does bacteria do that? How does bacteria become resistant to antibiotics? They have specific pumps that are going to inject antibiotics from the bacteria. They are not going to take in the antibiotics simply. Fine.
Mm-hmm.
They have active pumps that are actively going to remove all the antibiotics from their bodies. Or maybe bacteria have certain proteins that chop off antibiotics so that they do not harm the bacteria. Okay,
I see. Yeah.
right? So they simply
Mm-hmm.
chop off the given antibiotic. Or maybe the bacteria have certain mechanism by which they have actually mutated their proteins, or they have actually changed the proteins so that this antibiotic is was specific for a previous kind of protein, but now the bacteria has come up with a new protein. So
Mm-hmm.
this antibiotic cannot bind with this protein or this antigen, and it is not going to kill it. Okay. So
Mm-hmm.
mutations are another cause of antibiotic resistance. So when we are talking about different strains of COVID, the Delta strain, and maybe that means that COVID is actively mutating its protein. The coronavirus, it is actually actively mutating its proteins, and it is actually coming up more stronger. Okay.
Okay.
So this is similar to this is happening in the antibiotic resistance. The bacteria, they come up with a new strain which is stronger than the previous one, and that is why the antibiotic cannot act on them. So this is how the antibiotic resistance develops. Fine. So this is a
Okay.
summary of
Yeah.
how plants and animals, they actually respond to infections. In case of plants, they have physical barriers like cuticles, stomata, cell wall. Fine. But even if they are damaged and the bacteria pathogen tries to enter, this immune response is going to activate. It is going to produce reactive oxygen species and certain chemicals to fight with this pathogen. Okay. This is a
Okay.
plant cell. On the other hand, in case of animals, if the bacteria somehow or the pathogen somehow crosses this physical barrier, again this innate immunity which was in since our birth, or the adaptive immunity, both are going to combine, active combined, and then both are going to activate to stop this pathogen from killing us. Okay.
Hmm.
These innate and adaptive immunity are going to work together with the help of these cells to actually kill this pathogen, or to actually stop this pathogen from killing us. Okay.
Okay.
Summary of what we have read about plant and animal immune responses up till now.
Hmm.
This was all about chapter 12. If